let's jump straight into this explainer. If you think ancient philosophy is just dry, overly serious, or, incredibly boring, well, get ready to have that stereotype totally shattered. Today, we're exploring the Pāthika Sutta. It's a 2,500-year-old Buddhist text that is shockingly hilarious. Bordering on actual slapstick comedy, yet deeply, deeply profound. It is just a brilliant piece of satire that takes on human expectations, the allure of cheap magic, and the real purpose of spiritual practice. So picture this. We've got a hugely disgruntled disciple named Sunakata. Think of him like a totally dissatisfied customer leaving a scathing one-star review, but instead of Yelp, he's reviewing the Buddha. He literally walks right up to the Buddha and says he's disavowing all of his teachings. And why? Well, because the Buddha isn't putting on a good enough show. He's not doing superhuman magic tricks, and he hasn't explained how the universe began. Sunakata just throws his hands up and walks away. The entire rest of the text is basically the Buddha responding to this wildly absurd resignation.
Which perfectly sets up part 1, purpose over psychic powers. So the Buddha recounts his interaction with this guy, and it really exposes this massive canyon in their expectations. Sunakata wants the fireworks, right? He wants flashy demonstrations of psychic powers and the grand origin story of the world. But the Buddha, his goal is entirely grounded and singular, the complete ending of human suffering. He even points out, I never promised you magic tricks when you joined us, and that was certainly never a condition of your training.
And then the Buddha hits him with this perfectly reasoned, rhetorical rebuttal. Whether or not there is a demonstration of psychic power, does my teaching lead someone who practices it to the goal of the complete ending of suffering? Wow. Sunakata is backed into a corner and forced to admit that, well, yes, it does. The Buddha's point here is absolutely razor sharp. What is the actual point of a magic trick? Does knowing a magic trick cure your internal human suffering? Of course not. So he tells Sunakata to take a hard look at how far he strayed from the actual path.
All right, moving right along to part 2, the fraudulent ascetics.
Now, you might be wondering, if Sunakata doesn't respect the Buddha, who on earth does he actually admire? Well, the text pivots into this hilariously absurd catalog of the holy men he looks up to. First up is Korakāthya, the aristocrat of Kuru. Get this guy has taken a bizarre vow to behave entirely like a dog. When food is tossed on the dirt, he literally gets down on all fours and eats it using only his mouth. And the punchline? Sunakata watches this man eating dirt on all fours and genuinely thinks, now that is a holy man. The Buddha actually has to step in and point out how completely ridiculous this is.
But since Sunakata is absolutely begging for a psychic prediction, the Buddha finally gives him one. And it's incredibly specific and, honestly, darkly comedic. The Buddha predicts that in exactly 7 days, this dog-imitating holy man is going to die of flatulent indigestion. Yeah, you heard that right. Furthermore, after he dies, his body will be tossed into the charnel ground, landing specifically on a clump of vetiver grass. Now, here is the really fascinating part of this cosmic punchline. The Buddha adds that upon death, Korakāthya is definitely not achieving some grand spiritual awakening. Instead, he's going to be reborn as a Kalakanja. In ancient Buddhist lore, Kalakanjas are literally the absolute lowest rank of terrifying titans. It's a truly grim, deeply embarrassing cosmic destiny for a guy pretending to be some great ascetic.
So what does Sunakata do? He actually counts down the days, secretly hoping the Buddha is totally wrong. But sure enough, on day 7, the ascetic dies of flatulence and is tossed right onto that exact patch of grass. Sunakata then marches up to the corpse and punches it 3 times. And bizarrely, the dead man sits up, rubs his back, verbally confirms, I have been reborn as a Kalakanja, and then just falls flat dead again. So Sunakata literally revives the dead, proves the Buddha's incredibly specific prediction is 100% right, and still goes back to complain that the Buddha doesn't do enough magic. You couldn't make this up. Then we quickly move on to a second fraud that Sunakata idolizes, a naked ascetic named Kalara Mataka. Now this man has taken these intensely strict vows. He's never going to wear clothes, never take a partner, and only ever eat meat and beer. The Buddha just calmly predicts that this guy is going to break every single one of those vows. He's going to put on clothes, find a partner, start eating rice, and totally lose his fame. And predictably, exactly as the Buddha foresaw, the fraud completely crumbles.
And all of this builds up to our final fraud, a guy named Pāthika Sutta. Now this guy is bold. He decides to publicly challenge the Buddha to a full-on magic duel. He's out there boasting to huge crowds in the city, claiming that if the Buddha comes halfway to meet him, he will perform double whatever magic the Buddha does. If the Buddha does 4 tricks, he'll do 8, and so on.
But the Buddha just predicts that Pāthika Sutta won't even be able to show his face.
And here is where we hit the absolute slapstick climax of the whole story. The Buddha actually goes to the town, right? A massive crowd gathers for this epic magical showdown, but Pāthika Sutta totally panics and runs away to hide in a different park. Messengers are sent to drag him back. Pāthika Sutta keeps yelling, I'm coming, but he physically cannot stand up. He's just wriggling around on his seat. A messenger literally asks him, is your bottom stuck to the bench, or is the bench stuck to your bottom? He is magically glued to his chair. He's thoroughly humiliated and loses the duel by default.
Which smoothly brings us to part 3, the jackal and the lion. So while Pāthika Sutta is pathetically wriggling on his bench, a disciple named Jalya steps in to deliver a crushing storybook fable to the immobilized fraud. He tells this story about an arrogant old jackal. You see, this jackal has spent his entire life just eating the scraps left behind by a mighty lion. Because he's grown fat on these leftovers, he gets arrogant. He starts thinking, hey, what does the lion have that I don't? I should be the king of the beasts. So he decides to mimic the lion perfectly. He struts out into the forest, surveys the land, puffs out his chest, and prepares to let out a terrifying, majestic roar.
But the moment he opens his mouth, he only manages to squeal and yelp like a jackal. Jalya directly compares this pathetic little squeal to Pāthika Sutta and all these other boastful charlatans. They feed off the scraps of true holiness. They boast loudly to the crowds. But when it is actually time to show up and roar like a lion, all they can do is yelp.
Finally, we arrive at part 4, the origin of the world. And let me tell you, this is where we get a massive, absolute mind-bending twist.
Because after spending this entire text just ruthlessly mocking magical claims and demanding students, the Buddha actually does explain the origin of the cosmos. He describes this impossibly vast scale of time where the universe just endlessly contracts and expands. During the contraction phase, beings exist purely as mind-made, luminous energy. But as the universe expands, an empty mansion of divinity appears, and eventually a lone being falls into it.
So, the absolute crucial takeaway here is how this creates the ultimate illusion. Think about the sequence. First, a being is born entirely alone in this giant, empty cosmic mansion. Second, after a really long time, it gets lonely and wishes for some company. Third, strictly due to cosmic timing, other beings eventually pass away from their radiant realm and appear in the mansion alongside him. And fourth, that very first being looks around, realizes he wished for company, sees the company has arrived, and falsely assumes, wow, I must be the creator God. The Buddha uses this grand cosmic knowledge not to show off, but to dismantle the very idea of a supreme creator, revealing it as just a cosmic trick of loneliness and timing.
Which leaves us with this really powerful final thought. Sunakantara wanted miracles. He demanded to know the universe's greatest secrets. But as the Buddha so masterfully demonstrated, through satire, through slapstick, and deep philosophy, does knowing the origin of the universe or possessing magic powers actually free us from human suffering? I mean, look at the charlatans. They ended up eating dirt, exploding, or literally glued to benches. The Buddha, meanwhile, just stayed totally focused on the actual, pragmatic work of achieving inner peace. It is a brilliant reminder that sometimes the absolute most profound truth is simply realizing what information you don't actually need. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you on the next one.